the fire is already built. It's the 30th of May, 1431, in the old marketplace at Rouen, a city held by an English army, and the crowd has been let in to watch. The prisoner is about 19 years old. She's a farmer's daughter from a village on the edge of the kingdom, and 3 years before this, she had never held a weapon in her life. Then she rode into a besieged city and broke a siege that had held for 7 months. She stood beside a king at his coronation. And now she's at the stake, calling out the name of Jesus as the wood catches. The court that put her there had spent 4.5 months trying to prove she was a heretic. And the charge they finally burned her on wasn't witchcraft. It wasn't even hearing voices. It was her clothes. 25 years later, a second court would reopen every page of that trial, listen to 115 people who had actually known her, and tear the verdict up. So how does a teenage girl end up on that fire? And how do the men who lit it end up losing? Joan of Arc. She was born around 1412 in Domremy, a small village in the Meuse Valley. Nobody wrote the date down. You'll see the 6th of January quoted everywhere, but that comes from one letter by one courtier, which historians read as flowery storytelling rather than a record. At her own trial, she said only that she was about 19. Her father, Jacques, farmed roughly 50 acres and held a minor village office. Her mother was called Isabelle. 3 older brothers, 1 older sister. And here's the thing about that village that usually gets lost. Domremy sat in a sliver of land that had owed loyalty to the French crown since 1301, surrounded on almost every side by territory loyal to the Duke of Burgundy, who was allied with the English. So she didn't grow up in enemy country and rebel against it. She grew up on a small loyal island with hostile country pressing in, close enough that in July 1428 Burgundian soldiers came through and raided it. This was a child who watched the war arrive at her own door. What she claimed happened to her 3 years before that raid is the part nobody has ever been able to explain. She was about 13, in her father's garden, when she said she first heard a voice. At her trial, the clerks wrote it down almost word for word. At the age of 13, she had a voice from God to help her and guide her, and the first time, she was much afraid. Later, she named the figures she said came to her. The Archangel Michael, St. Catherine, St. Margaret. She said the voices often came with the church bells and that she promised them she'd stay a virgin. Now, what those voices actually were is a question the record cannot answer, and anyone who tells you it can is selling something. Divine, psychological, neurological, the evidence doesn't reach that far. What the record does show is this. She was cross-examined for months by hostile, highly trained churchmen who wanted her to slip, and her account never came apart. Same story every time. There's not a day when she doesn't hear this voice, she told them, and she has much need of it. At 16, she stopped waiting. She walked out of the village to find a soldier and ask him for an army. The soldier was Robert de Baudricourt, the garrison captain at Vaucouleurs. In May 1428, she turned up with her uncle and asked him for an armed escort to the Dauphin, the uncrowned heir to the French throne. She told him a prophecy said France would be ruined by a woman and saved by a virgin from Lorraine. Baudricourt sent her home. She came back in January, and he refused again. Then, according to accounts written soon afterward, something changed his mind completely. She told him about a French defeat near Orleans on the day it was being fought, days before any rider could have brought the news. It's generally matched to a battle on the 12th of February 1429. When the couriers confirmed it, Baudricourt gave her everything she'd asked for. Worth saying plainly, that story isn't in the trial transcript, so treat it as widely reported rather than proven. What is documented is what he handed her for the road. A safe conduct, 6 armed men, a sword, and a set of men's clothes, because a girl crossing hundreds of miles of enemy country in a dress would not have arrived. Remember those clothes. They're going to matter more than anything else in this story. She reached the castle at Chinon in late February 1429. She was 17. Charles, the man she'd come to crown, was 26, and his claim to the throne was in real trouble. Here the legend takes over, so let's separate the two. The famous version has Charles hiding among his courtiers to test her, and the peasant girl walking straight through the crowd to the right man. That staging comes from chronicles written well after the fact. What contemporaries record is vaguer and, honestly, stranger. Something happened in a private conversation, and Charles came out of it persuaded. Tradition says she told him a secret only he could know, often described as a private prayer he'd made alone, asking God whether he was really the rightful heir. No surviving document records what was said. Anyone who tells you what the sign was is guessing. Charles didn't just take her word for it either. He had theologians at Poitiers examine her for weeks for signs of heresy, and they found none. Separately, women verified she was a virgin, which ruled out witchcraft in the minds of the day. Cleared on both counts, she was given armor, a banner she designed herself, and a horse. Now she had to prove it somewhere it counted. Orléans had been under siege since October 1428. 7 months. If the city fell, the road south lay open and Charles was finished. A letter went ahead of her to the English commanders, telling the King of England to do right by the King of Heaven and give up his hold on France. She signed it, the Maiden. On the 29th of April 1429, around 8 in the evening, she came into the city with a relief force. What followed took 9 days. On the 4th of May, the French took the fort of Saint-Loup, with her rallying troops who were already falling back. On the 6th, they took 2 more. On the 7th, they went at Les Tourelles, the strong point guarding the bridge, and standing in the trench she was hit between the neck and shoulder by an arrow. By her own account, she cried, from the pain and from fear, then went back to the field that same evening to push the final assault. The next morning, the English pulled down their siege works, drew up outside the walls, and marched away without a fight. 7 months of siege, broken in 9 days. And almost everything you picture her doing in those 9 days is wrong. Start with the sword. The popular story says she carried a magic blade, dug out from behind an altar at a church called Fierbois, and that it had belonged to Charles Martel, the man who stopped an Arab army in 732. That link is fiction, invented by a poet in the 1700s. The real explanation is dull and far more likely. Leaving weapons at that church as an offering was a normal thing for soldiers to do, so an old rusted blade behind the altar is exactly what you'd expect. She never claimed the sword had power. She said her strength was founded in the Lord and no one else. Now the bigger one. Under questioning, she testified she had never killed anyone. Not one man. She carried a banner into the fighting, not a sword, specifically so she wouldn't have to kill. Read the trial record and the picture isn't a warrior hacking through English lines. It's a teenager who rode at the front where everyone could see her, argued in war councils for attacking instead of waiting, and made hardened captains believe they could win. That was the weapon. And it was about to put a crown on a man's head. What came next is the run that made her famous. The Loire campaign opened on the 11th of June at Jargeau. 4 days later, the bridge at Meuse fell. On the 18th, Beaugency surrendered, and that same day the French smashed an English army in open field at Patay. She'd arrived after the fighting started, but chasing them down that hard was her doing. Then she argued for the thing the cautious men around the king thought was madness. Not consolidating the Loire, marching through hostile ground to Reims. Reims mattered because Reims was where French kings had always been crowned, with the sacred oil kept there, and a king crowned anywhere else would never quite be the real thing. The army left Gien on the 29th of June. Auxerre came to terms on the 3rd of July. On the 16th, Reims opened its gates. And on the 17th of July, 1429, in the cathedral, Charles VII was consecrated King of France, with the girl from Domremy in a place of honor beside him. She was still 17. 8 weeks later, the fall would start. The version of this story most people carry is an unbroken run of miracles, from a village garden to the stake. It isn't true, and the place it breaks is Paris. On the 8th of September 1429, she entered the city, still held by the English and the Burgundians. It failed. She was shot through the leg with a crossbow bolt and had to be dragged back after dark, and the French lost something like 1,500 men at the walls. The next morning, she wanted to go again. Charles refused. He ordered the assault called off and the army pulled back, and she had no choice but to obey. That's the moment the ground shifts under her. She'd been useful to a king who needed a crown, and now he had one, and what he wanted next was a negotiated settlement, not a girl in armor demanding another attack. Her word stopped carrying at court. She kept fighting anyway. With volunteers she raised herself, which is how she ended up outside a town called Compiegne in the spring of 1430, on the wrong side of a closing gate. It happened on the 23rd of May. She was pulled off her horse in a skirmish outside the walls and taken prisoner by Burgundian troops under a nobleman called John of Luxembourg. In that century, a captured commander was a business asset. You held them, He named a price, and their own side paid it. Charles VII did not pay it. Nobody came. She was held for months, and at one point tried to get herself out by jumping from a tower at Beaurevoir, which injured her and achieved nothing. Meanwhile, the English were negotiating, and they wanted her badly enough to spend about 10,000 livres, an enormous sum, to buy her. Driving those talks was Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais, a churchman firmly on the English side who'd been chased out of his own diocese by the French advance. He was arranging to buy a prisoner he then intended to judge. Around November 1430, the handover went through and she was moved to English-held Rouen. And then came the first irregularity of many. A prisoner of the church was supposed to be guarded by women. She was put in a military cell in irons, guarded by English soldiers. The trial ran from the 9th of January to the end of May 1431, 4.5 months, with Cauchon presiding. Canon law required an inquisitor present for a heresy trial to be valid. The vice-inquisitor, Jean Lemestre, was missing for most of it, and a witness later testified he had to be threatened into turning up. There were 15 interrogation sessions. 6 were public. 9 were held privately in her cell, which wasn't how this was supposed to work either. The prosecution drew up 70 articles and boiled them down to 12, covering her visions, her clothes, and the charge underneath all of it, that she claimed to hear God directly and so had no need of the church in between. An illiterate 19-year-old with no lawyer against a room of university-trained theologians. She should have been taken apart in a week. Instead, they asked whether she knew she was in God's grace. It was a trap with no exit. Say yes and you're guilty of appalling presumption, because no one can know that. Say no and you've condemned yourself. She answered, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God keep me there." The room, by several accounts, was stunned. So they stopped trying to beat her with theology and went after something much smaller. On the 24th of May 1431, they took her out to a scaffold in a cemetery beside the church of Saint-Ouen, showed her the fire, and told her she'd burn that day unless she signed. She signed. The document renounced her visions and promised she'd wear women's clothes from then on, and it bought her a life sentence instead of a death sentence. 4 days later, she was back in men's clothes and saying the voices were real after all. Why is genuinely unresolved. Some accounts say her dress was taken from the cell and only men's clothing left. Others say she'd faced attempts at assault by the guards and found men's clothing, laced and tied shut, the only protection she had. Some historians think she never understood what she'd marked because she couldn't read it. The court didn't care which. Under canon law, a heretic who abjures and then goes back is a relapsed heretic, and a relapsed heretic can be handed to the state and killed. That was the only door to an execution, and she'd just walked through it. So the formal, written-down reason a 19-year-old was burned alive is that she put trousers back on. And the same canon law those men had spent their careers studying already allowed an exception out of necessity. They didn't apply it. The 30th of May 1431, the old marketplace in Rouen, and a girl calling on the name of Jesus while she burns. And then the court did something that tells you everything about what they were afraid of. They had the body burned a second time. Then a third. Then they had the ashes thrown into the Seine so that not one fragment of her could ever be kept as a relic. They weren't disposing of a heretic. They were trying to prevent a saint. 2 stories cling to that afternoon and both need a label. The first says her heart was found whole in the ashes, unburned, which is why they lit the fire again. It's told and retold, and it's legend, not a documented finding. The second says the executioner, Geoffroy Therage, went to pieces that night and told people he burned the saint and damned himself. That one comes from later second-hand accounts too. Here's what isn't legend. Throwing her into the river didn't work. Within 25 years, the verdict that killed her would be dragged back into a courtroom. First, a loose end. 5 years after the fire, a woman turned up in Lorraine claiming to be her, married a knight, took the name des Amoises, and collected gifts for 4 years. Her own brothers backed her. It's the survival theory people still repeat, and it's dead, she confessed to being an imposter in 1440 in front of witnesses more than once. The real ending is a courtroom. Charles VII ordered a review in 1450. The Pope authorized a full reinvestigation after a petition from her mother and brothers, and an inquisitor named Jean Brehal drove it. The nullification trial opened in Paris in November 1455, and delivered its verdict on the 7th of July 1456. Around 115 witnesses were heard: childhood neighbors, soldiers who'd ridden with her, citizens of Orléans who'd lived through the siege, several men from the original tribunal who developed remarkably convenient memory problems. The verdict called the trial of 1431 tainted with fraud, calumny, iniquity, and contradiction, wiped the charges out, and ordered the articles of accusation torn from the record and publicly burned at Rouen. Her mother, elderly by then, lived to hear it. Brahal went further and suggested the judges themselves might have been the heretics. She was beatified in 1909, made a saint in 1920, and is a patron saint of France. Think about what the record actually contains. A girl who couldn't read, from a village of no importance, who never killed a single person, who ended a 7-month siege in 9 days and put a king on a throne before she turned 18. And a court of educated men who couldn't break her with theology, so they got her on her wardrobe. That's the part worth carrying out of this. Not the armor, and not the banner. The machinery that killed her was paperwork, applied by people who knew exactly which rule they were choosing not to use. They burned her body 3 times and threw what was left in a river, and it still didn't work, because you can't drown a witness list. 25 years later, 115 people stood up and said what they'd seen. So here's my question for you. If she'd kept her mouth shut at 19 and taken the life sentence, would anyone remember her name at all? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want more stories where the official record is the strangest part, you know what to do.